The following is a presentation of the Steamboat Church of Christ in Steamboat Springs, Colorado. We hope that you find today's lesson presented by our minister, Dr. Joseph Becker, informative, insightful, and inspirational.
The text for this morning's lesson is a conflation of Matthew 26, 36 through 46, Mark 14, 32 through 42, Luke 22, 39 through 46, and John 18, 1. And as we read through this text, I will not be calling out book, chapter, and verse for each phrase, but there's a fully annotated copy of this pericope printed in your bulletin. In full, it reads as follows. When he had spoken these words, and when they had all sung a hymn, Jesus went out with his disciples across the Kidron Valley, as was his custom, to the Mount of Olives, where there was a garden, a place called Gethsemane. Arriving there, he entered, followed by his disciples. When he arrived at the appointed place, he said to his disciples, "Sit here and pray that you may not enter into temptation, while I go and pray yonder." And taking with him Peter and the two sons of Zebedee, James and John, he withdrew from them about a stone's throw away. Beset with bewilderment, grief, and heaviness of heart, he said to them, "My soul is deeply grieved, even to the point of death. Remain here and keep watch with me." And going a little farther, he fell to his knees, his face to the ground, and prayed that, if it were possible, the hour might pass from him, saying, "Abba, my Father, all things are possible for you. If it be possible, let this cup pass from me. If you are willing, remove this cup from me. Even so, not my will, but thine be done." And there appeared to him an angel from heaven, strengthening him. And being in an agony, he prayed more earnestly, and his sweat became like great drops of blood falling down to the ground. And when he rose from prayer, he came to the disciples and found them sleeping for sorrow. And he said to Peter, "Simon, are you asleep? Could you not keep watch with me for 1 hour? Why are you sleeping? Rise and pray that you may not enter into temptation. The spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak." Again, for the second time, he went away and prayed, "My Father, if this cannot pass unless I drink it, your will be done." And again he came and found them sleeping, for their eyes were very heavy, and they did not know what to answer him. So leaving them again, he went away and prayed for the third time, saying the same words again. And he came the third time and said to them, "Are you still sleeping and taking your rest? Outstanding. Behold, the hour has come. The Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners. Arise and let us go hence. Behold, my betrayer is at hand." And now returning to the beginning of our text with exposition, when he had spoken these words, and when they had all sung a hymn. And this is something that has always intrigued me. First, because I'm fascinated by the image of Jesus singing. I want to hear his voice. I want to know what his voice sounds like. I want to hear him speak, to be sure, but to hear him sing, that would be rapture. That would be bliss. And I've always wondered what he and the apostles sang on this occasion and what it sounded like. And as it turns out, I'm not the only person who's ever asked that question. Noted Hebrew scholar Eric Werner dedicated 30 years of his life to studying this question. And he published a book on the matter entitled The Sacred Bridge, in which he demonstrates that the Gregorian chant of the early church, for which we have notation, is modeled after the hymns of the synagogue of first century Palestine. And he has been able to match the text of first century Hebrew hymns to known tunes of the era, giving us a pretty good idea of the content of the hymns of Jesus' day and of what they sounded like. Furthermore, Werner has reconstructed the Passover liturgy that was in use at the time of Christ and is persuaded that the content of the hymns sung at Passover can be found in the text of Psalms 113 through 118. And though we don't know which of these was sung on this night, the most fitting for the occasion, in my assessment, would have been Psalm 116, which runs, "Alleluia! I am filled with love because the Lord hears me when I pray. He bends down and listens to me when I call out to him. Indeed, the cords of death were tightening round me. The noose of Sheol had a stranglehold on me. Anguish and distress had me in their grip. Then I invoked the name of the Lord, saying, 'Lord, rescue me. The Lord is righteous and merciful. Our God is full of compassion. The Lord preserves the poor in spirit. And he saved me. Thus I was brought to my knees. Be at peace once again, O my soul, for the Lord has been good to you. He has rescued me from death. He has wiped the tears from my eyes. He has kept my feet from stumbling. I will walk in the presence of the Lord right here in the land of the living. My speech remained faithful, even when I was in great distress, even though I spoke harshly, saying, all men are liars. What shall I return to the Lord for all his goodness to me? I will drink from the cup of salvation. I will call out the name of the Lord. I will pledge my faith to the Lord in the presence of the people. For in the eyes of the Lord, death is the price that must be paid for his faithful ones. Thus, as the servant of the Lord, as one who has been freed from bondage, I will serve you alongside my mother. I will offer you the sacrifice of thanksgiving. I will call out the name of the Lord. I will pledge my faith to the Lord in the presence of the people, in the precincts of the house of the Lord, in the heart of Jerusalem. Praise the Lord. Returning to our text, Jesus went out with the disciples across the Kidron Valley, as was his custom, to the Mount of Olives, where there was a garden, a place called Gethsemane. Now, this walk was not a major trek. From the precincts of Old Jerusalem to the entrance of the Garden of Gethsemane is about a half-mile walk, which at 2 miles an hour would take about 15 minutes. And according to Luke 22:39, they had a favorite spot in the garden where they would go, which was a location known to all of them. And this accounts for how it is that Judas was able to lead the authorities straight to Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, which place it would seem is fortuitously named because Gethsemane means olive press. The word is of Hebrew origin, and we find a form of the word shemen in Exodus 27:20-21, where God says to Moses, you shall command the people of Israel that they bring to you pressed olive oil for the lamp, that the lampstand may stand alight continually in the tent of meeting, outside the veil that is before the testimony. Aaron and his sons shall tend it from evening to morning before the Lord. It shall be a statute forever to be observed throughout their generations by the children of Israel. And we know from Revelation 1:12 and following that the lampstands of the tabernacle were a type and shadow of the church. Then I turned to see the voice that was speaking to me, and on turning I saw 7 golden lampstands, and in the midst of the lampstands one like a son of man, clothed with a long robe and with a golden sash around his chest. The hairs of his head were white, like white wool, like snow. His eyes were like a flame of fire. His feet were like burnished bronze refined in a furnace, and his voice was like the roar of many waters. In his right hand he held 7 stars. From his mouth came a sharp 2-edged sword, and his face was like the sun shining in full strength. Then skipping to verse 20, as for the mystery of the 7 stars that you saw in my right hand and the 7 golden lampstands, the 7 stars are the angels of the 7 churches, and the 7 lampstands are the 7 churches. And I find it interesting that the place where Christ, whose own blood is the lifeblood of the church, is pressed such that his sweat falls as great drops of blood to the ground, is named for the press that fuels the golden lampstand of the tabernacle, which is a type and shadow of the church. Continuing on, arriving there he entered, followed by his disciples. And here we note that on this trek to the Garden of Gethsemane, Jesus is at the front of the pack, in the lead. In John 10:1-5, Jesus says, truly, truly I say to you, he who does not enter the sheepfold by the door, but climbs in by another way, that man is a thief and a robber. But he who enters by the door is the shepherd of the sheep. To him the gatekeeper opens. The sheep hear his voice, and he calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. When he has brought out all his own, he goes before them, and the sheep follow him, for they know his voice. A stranger they will not follow, but they will flee from him, for they do not know the voice of strangers. And here I'm reminded of the story of the tour guide, taking a group of Westerners on a tour of the Holy Lands and explaining to them how it is that a good shepherd calls his sheep, and they hear his voice and follow. And just about that time there came a flock of sheep crossing the road with a man at their rear prodding them with a staff. And the tourists all looked at the tour guide as if to say, "Really?" And the tour guide, thinking quickly, said, "He's not the shepherd. He's the butcher." But make no mistake about it. Jesus leads us from the fore. Hebrews 12, 1 through 3, "Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out before us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy set before him endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Consider him who endured such opposition from sinners, so that you will not grow weary and lose heart." Then back to our text. When he arrived at the appointed place, he said to his disciples, "Sit here and pray that you may not enter into temptation, while I go and pray yonder." And why did he want to pray in a place separate from his disciples? Why didn't they all just pray together? Well, I think because they have different prayer needs. Christ has his own prayers that are his alone to bring before the Father. The apostles need to pray that they may not enter into temptation. Remember, it's recorded for us in Luke 22, 31 through 32, that earlier in that evening, Jesus had said to Peter, "Simon, Simon, Satan has asked to sift all of you as wheat. But I have prayed for you, Simon, that your faith may not fail, and that when you have repented and have returned back to me, you will strengthen your brothers." The apostles have different spiritual needs than does Jesus. But make no mistake about it, Jesus has spiritual needs, and he does not want to bear them alone. As our text continues, "And taking with him Peter and the two sons of Zebedee, James and John, he withdrew from them about a stone's throw away." His prayer is private, but his circle of privacy is not a circle of one, but a circle of four, including himself, Peter, James, and John. Beloved, Jesus doesn't love everybody the same, and he doesn't treat everybody the same, probably because the Lord is a realist and everybody isn't the same. Peter was chosen to be the first among the apostles, the leader of the church. Matthew 16, 13 through 19, "Now when Jesus came into the district of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, 'Who do the people say that the Son of Man is?' And they said, 'Some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and others Jeremiah or one of the prophets.' He said to them, 'But who do you say that I am?' Simon Peter replied, 'You are the Christ, the Son of the living God.' And Jesus answered him, 'Blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father who is in heaven. And I tell you, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven." Yes, Peter stands apart from the other apostles. And what about James? Well, James here is not James, the brother of the Lord. This is not the author of the book of James. This is not the James who presided over the Jerusalem council and who threw Paul under the bus in Acts 21. No, this is James, the brother of John, who was the first of the apostles to be martyred, which martyrdom took place in 44 AD. Acts 12, 1 through 2. It was about this time that King Herod arrested some who belonged to the church, intending to persecute them. And he had James, the brother of John, put to death with the sword. Thus James stands apart from the other apostles. And as for John, he was Jesus' best friend when he was on earth. Indeed, according to John 13:23, 22, 21:7, and 21:20, John is the apostle whom Jesus loved. Thus, John also stands apart from the other apostles. This was his inner circle from the beginning to the end. And these were the people the Lord wanted with him in this hour of great distress. Returning to our text, beset with bewilderment, grief, and heaviness of heart, he said to them, "My soul is deeply grieved, even to the point of death. And this, I think, is no exaggeration on Jesus' part. Grief can be so severe that people die from it. The medical community even has a name for it. It's called the broken heart syndrome. And it's often manifested in couples who've been married for a very long time. One spouse dies, and within a very brief time afterward, the other follows. You all know that my dad passed away earlier this year, and that for the last couple of months, my mother has been sick, which, by the way, she's feeling much better now this week. Well, there's a woman who lives in Mom's building who keeps telling her that she's suffering from broken heart syndrome and that she's sure to die soon. But I can assure you that that is not going to happen. If for no other reason than because Mom's level of appreciation for this woman is such that even if only by sheer will and determination, she will live long enough to attend her funeral. Well, Jesus isn't going to die of grief either. But by his own testimony, the grief he's experiencing this night would be powerful enough to relieve him of his life if he were to surrender to it. And he will surrender to death shortly after this, but not to grief. And one of the reasons why his grief will not overwhelm him is because he does not have to bear it alone. He has Peter, James, and John with him to help him shoulder the load. And he says to them, "Remain here and keep watch with me." And I'll have more to say a little further down about keeping watch. For now I want to press on, and going a little further, he fell to his knees, his face to the ground. And here I just want to note that the Lord's posture in prayer denotes a deep degree of commitment to this prayer. You may not think that it makes any difference what physical posture we assume whenever we come to God in prayer, but I think it's worth mentioning that on 167 occasions in the Bible, the physical posture taken in a given prayer was significant enough to be featured in the text by the author reporting it. And the breakdown is as follows. Standing in prayer, 65 occurrences. Lying prostrate, 23. Laying on of hands, 22. Raising hands, 20. Kneeling, 17. Lifting the eyes, 7. Bowing low, that is, kneeling with your face to the ground, as here with Jesus, 6. Bowing the head, 6. Praying while seated, 1. And curiously enough, closing the eyes, 0. Now, I'll say more about this in another lesson. But for today's purposes, just know that as we take biblical examples of prayer into account, it seems that certain prayer postures are favored for certain kinds of occasions. And generally speaking, the more extreme the circumstances, the more extreme the posture in prayer. Moving on, and he prayed that if it were possible, the hour might pass from him, saying, "Abba, my Father, all things are possible for you. If it be possible, let this cup pass from me." And here I just want to point out that quite apparently, as Jesus seems to understand the matter, the proposition, "all things are possible for God," and the conditional clause, "if it be possible," are not mutually exclusive. Because while all things are possible for God, not every imaginable request is a thing. All things are possible for God, but it would seem that the accomplishment of redemption by a Savior who does not drink of the cup set before him isn't a thing. It's a manifest absurdity, a nonce, a non sequitur, an oxymoron, a contradiction. And absurdity is not God's stock in trade. Logic is. All things are possible for God, but incoherent propositions are not things. And God is not willing to equivocate when it comes to reality. As Jesus goes on to say, "If you are willing, remove this cup from me. Even so, not my will, but thine be done." Moving along, and there appeared to him an angel from heaven, strengthening him. And I find this encouraging. In Matthew 6, 7 through 8, Jesus says, "And when you pray, do not heap up empty phrases as the Gentiles do, for they think that they will be heard for their many words. Do not be like them, for your Father knows what you need before you ask him." Jesus did not ask for an angel to come, but the Father anticipated this need and sent the angel to him. And at any given time, he may do the same for any of us. As we read in Hebrews 13, 1 through 2, Let brotherly love continue. Do not neglect to show hospitality to strangers, for thereby some have entertained angels unawares. Continuing with our reading, and being in an agony, he prayed more earnestly, and his sweat became like great drops of blood falling down to the ground. And here I just want to point out a peculiarity in the language that Luke uses. In this passage, only one translation in 7 follows the lead of the King James Version, but here I think the King James people got it right, because they do not report to us that the Lord was in agony, which in modern parlance suggests that he was in pain. Rather, in the King James here, it says that the Lord was in an agony, which in archaic language means that he was in a contest, or an ordeal, or a struggle for victory. And this is much more in keeping with the Greek word agonia, which evokes the very same thing. The Lord may well have been in pain, but that isn't what's in view in the word agony. An agony is an ordeal, a contest, a struggle for victory, a struggle for survival. Which struggle must have been quite intense, considering that it manifested itself in the body of Christ as great drops of sweat that fell to the ground in a way similar to the way that drops of blood fall to the ground. Which, by the way, I think we've all heard lessons that evoke a rare medical condition called hematidrosis, in which extreme stress can be manifested in the sweating of blood. And that could be what's in view in this passage, but the text certainly doesn't demand it. Returning to our text, and when he rose from prayer, he came to the disciples and found them sleeping for sorrow. And this I find very interesting. Frankly, until I was preparing for this lesson, I had never before taken note that according to Luke 22:45, the exacerbating factor that was causing the eyes of the apostles to grow heavy was not fatigue, but sorrow. And I think that we've all experienced this, that sometimes when your heart is grieved, you just need to sleep. Now, if this sense goes on for too long, one might need to seek medical attention because depression might be setting in. But absent full-blown depression, we all know what it's like to be so grief-stricken that the only remedy that seems to do any good is to sleep. And that is what besets the apostles on this night. They aren't cluelessly and carelessly falling asleep, oblivious to the deep distress that the Lord is in. No, they're in the same distress with him, and it is manifesting itself in them as torpor. And that's what Jesus calls on them to ward off in order to stay awake and keep watch with him. As the text goes on to say, and he said to Peter, Simon, are you asleep? Could you not keep watch with me for 1 hour? Why are you sleeping? Rise and pray that you may not enter into temptation. The spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak. You see, very often people take what Jesus says here when he refers to the weakness of the flesh to mean that the apostles' inability to stay awake is a sign of weakness. And it could be, but I don't think that that's what Jesus means here. There's nothing wrong with sleeping when you need sleep. Sleeping isn't a sin, and it isn't a sign of weakness. If it were either of those things, the Bible wouldn't report to us that when the apostles were caught up in a violent storm and they needed Jesus desperately, he was sound asleep in the hold of the ship. No, the words that Jesus speaks to the disciples here aren't intended as an indictment of the fact that they need sleep. The Lord is telling the apostles something instructive. He knows that they need sleep, but there's something to be gained by staying awake. And if they would undertake to keep watch and pray, they would in the end be strengthened in their bodies with the ability to resist temptation. After all, sin is a bodily receipt. As Paul says in Romans 7:5-6, for when we were in the flesh, the motions of sin, which were by the law, did work in our members to bring forth fruit unto death. But now we are being delivered from the law, that being dead wherein we were held, that we should serve in newness of spirit. The motions of sin are at work in our members, in our bodies. But because of the life of Christ at work in our bodies, we are being delivered from the law of sin and death. And what Jesus tells us in Mark 14:38 is that when we watch and pray, we are empowered through that discipline to resist temptation. Watching is a spiritual discipline that accomplishes something. When we keep watch, when we abstain from sleep in order to pray, we receive power. We receive strength that we would not otherwise have. An added power, an added strength to remain holy. An added power, an added strength to resist temptation. The spirit is willing, and the body, though it be weak, can be strengthened by watching and praying. This is not new to the apostles. In Matthew 24:42 through 44, the Lord had said to them, "Therefore keep watch, because you do not know on what day your Lord will come. But understand this, if the owner of the house had known at what time of night the thief was coming, he would have kept watch and would not have let his house be broken into. So you also must be ready, because the Son of Man will come at an hour when you do not expect him." This isn't a solemn warning that they need to be constantly on their best behavior because Jesus is lying in wait for them, ready to pounce and catch them doing something wrong when he returns. No, the Lord is telling the apostles something instructive, something constructive, something useful. There's something he wants them to do, and he would much rather see them do it and do it successfully than for them to suffer the consequences of not doing it. So he advises them in the way of a strategy that will help them to do his will. There's a discipline, he says, in which they can engage that will increase the likelihood that they will be able to do his will. Which discipline is that of watching, that of keeping watch. Moving along, again for the second time, he went away and prayed, "My Father, if this cannot pass unless I drink it, your will be done." And again he came and found them sleeping, for their eyes were very heavy, and they did not know how to answer him. The apostles were at a loss for words. And we all know what that's like. As Paul says in Romans 8:26, "Likewise the Spirit helps us in our weakness, for we do not know how to pray as we ought. But the Spirit himself intercedes for us with groanings too deep for words." And the Lord knows that the apostles are nonplussed in this situation. They don't know what to do with themselves. They don't know what to say. So he doesn't press them further. He simply returns to his prayer. So leaving them again, he went away and prayed for the third time, saying the same words again. And he came the third time and said to them, "Are you still sleeping and taking your rest?" Outstanding. And I don't know about you, but I love this quote in Mark 14:41 because this is gallows humor at its best. When Jesus returns the third time and finds the apostles sleeping once again, what he says upon this discovery, literally translated, is "far out." And I find this very endearing. I love the fact that here in his darkest hour, the Lord doesn't lose his sense of humor. He's not happy with the apostles, and he goes for the jugular with heavy sarcasm. Still sleeping? Spectacular. But this doesn't lighten the mood much, at least not for long. As our text continues, "Behold, the hour has come. The Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners. Arise and let us go hence. Behold, my betrayer is at hand." Because, you see, they have yet to arrive at the destination that Jesus named in John 14:30 through 31 when he said, "I'm done talking to you about this, for the prince of this world is coming. He has no hold over me, but he comes so that the world may learn that I love the Father and that I do exactly what my Father has commanded me. Come now, let us go hence." Because Gethsemane was never their destination. Their rendezvous with Satan is their destination. And that's where they're going next. To go toe to toe, mano a mano with Satan and with those who do his bidding. And that's where we'll pick up next week. That's my lesson for today.
This has been a presentation of the Steamboat Church of Christ. We hope that you have found Dr. Becker's message well appointed. To hear more lessons like this one, visit our website at www.steamboatchurch.org or come see us at 1698 Lincoln Avenue in Steamboat Springs, Colorado. Bible classes are Sunday mornings at 9:30 and worship services are at 10:30. We look forward to meeting you. Until then, may the grace and peace of our Lord Jesus Christ be with you.